What is the significance of 13, 13, 13 and the number 12,111? In Watcher 3, we investigated what appeared to be anomalous objects in front of the sun's surface. What's happening to the sun now? Are we about to experience some great solar upheaval? In 2012, there was a dramatic increase in UFO activity. Not only that, but combined with it were objects known as bolides coming into our atmosphere and creating loud sonic booms in Northern California that was actually heard all the way over in Nevada. The alien abduction phenomenon. And I know the moment I say that, some of you start squirming in your seat. But what if it's real? Could it be supernatural? What is reality? Could all of this be a digital simulation?
We now know that we are within a digital simulation.
Were the Nephilim real, or were they the product of an overactive imagination by some writer thousands of years ago? We're going to go to Rock Wall and look for evidence that may, in fact, prove that the giants once roamed North America.
Defense Secretary Panetta believes there is strong likelihood Israel will strike Iran in April, May, or June.
What's happening in Israel right now? We're going to sit down for an exclusive interview with Jonathan Daniels, who is the senior advisor to the Knesset, and get the inside scoop. Howard Storm died and went to hell. What happened to him next?
There is another reality much higher and more intense than what we call real.
We'll sit down with Dr. Jeffrey Long, who has interviewed over 3,000 people with what is known as a near-death experience. We're on our way to see Dr. Roger Leir, who recently gave us a call and asked us to come and interview him as he had some new information that he wanted to share with us. So we're on our way to a undisclosed location to meet with Dr. Leir. Hey, Dr. Leir, how are you, sir?
Oh, man, good to see you.
Good to see you.
Wonderful.
Recently, Professor Haralick of City University in New York City sent you some information about the resonance of nanotubes, specifically stating that whatever these things are, they could be operating at 100 times faster than the fastest computer on the planet. Can you comment on that?
Yes, I can certainly comment on it because what we've been finding with the objects that we've removed from the surgical patients are what are called single-walled carbon nanotubes. But occasionally we do find double-wall, and we know now that in manufacturing process we can make a structure which is a multi-walled carbon nanotube. And then in our own findings, we find that the more complex, or the more carbon nanotubes you have together, or the more carbon that's in them, you can increase the complexity of the function. So therefore, in looking at the article you sent me and sending it to our chief scientist at ANS, we came to the conclusion that he's most probably 100% on the right track, and that these are devices, and even the ones that he's talking about are, looked at as babies. These are minor, tiny little computerized machines, let's call them. But if whoever has this technology, if they extended it, I mean, we could look at something like a mainframe of modern size that would run the world.
Wow. That's startling. And in Watcher 3, you mentioned that you believed that these, whatever they are, call them chips or machines, are changing the host's DNA. Do you still stand by that?
Well, I think there's a good correlation or relationship between the host DNA and a foreign object in the body. Now, I'm not an authority on DNA, you know, but if we know and admit and understand that walking outside in the hot sun, being bombarded by high energy particles can change your DNA, then why isn't it possible then for a device to also do the same thing? Anyway, once that's in that container, it's sealed and then refrigerated until it's open again. And if it's not going directly to a lab, then I like to check on it every once in a while. So 48 hours went by and I pulled it out, pulled the specimen out and broke the seal and uncovered it and looked inside. And the first thing I noticed was that all the little pieces, which were kind of a very light tannish gray color, are now turning almost black.
Huh.
They begin to change color. So they're all lined up around the bottom of this container. Closed the top of the container back up and I shook it up. And then I opened it back up again to watch, to see what happens. And all those little pieces would start aggregating back in the position that they were originally.
So it's like they're under some sort of intelligent control to do that.
Yeah, some kind of memory metal.
Right. But the memory metal was also something that we hear about in the Roswell crash, allegedly, where Jesse Marcel Jr.
Right.
You know, gathered that thing up and it you know, came apart
Right.
and looked like no crease was in it at all.
That's
like it hadn't been balled up. Rob Skiba.
LA, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
Very good.
What do you think the Nephilim, what were the Nephilim?
The Nephilim. I believe that the ancient Hebrew text that we call the Torah, the first 5 books that Moses wrote, Genesis chapter 6, describes angels coming down and mating with women.
What kind of angels are we looking
Well,
at?
these are fallen angels,
Okay.
a class of angels that some of the extra-biblical texts, like the book of Enoch and other ancient texts, describes them as a class of angels known as the Watchers.
How does Genesis 6 relate to the present UFO phenomena, or doesn't it?
Well, I think it does relate because you have fallen angels. You have the Hapanai Elohim,
Which is what?
fallen angels. These are powerful beings that have come down, and they're coming down out of the skies. So there's a descent of them. They're in the skies. This relates later in the scriptures too about them being in the air, in the skies. So their presence and their ability, the physics of the dark side, have the ability to the Greek word used metaskizmazidai, the transfigure.
Everything is supposed to reproduce after its own kind. And the Genesis account talks about seed and everything producing after its own kind. And here's a situation where we have angels leaving their prior estate and coming down and mating with humans.
Terribly bad thing. They're seen as transmuted, something that is completely, I believe, an affront to God, and obviously sourced by the dark side.
Something that I've been studying recently has really got me thinking is in the ancient texts, in the book of Enoch in particular, it says that the Watchers that committed the Genesis 6 experiment, that mated with women, would be buried under the sands of the earth for 70 generations. Now, if my calculations are correct, I believe the Genesis 6 experiment took place at 3550 BC. First generation were killed off in 500 years. And then the Watchers were judged and buried under the sands for 70 generations. So that's sometime after 3050 BC. Well, Psalm 90 verse 10 defines a generation as 70 years, so simple math. 70 times 70 is 4,900 years. 4,900 years from roughly 3050 puts you at the end of the 1800s, early 1900s. If you think about the 20th century, we had a massive explosion of technology. We went from horse and buggy to space shuttles and computers.
Sure.
So I
Years,
have,
right.
yeah, for thousands of years, it was kind of
Flat
status
line,
quo.
right.
And then everything changed.
Men and women who get these implants removed, they don't want any notoriety, and they just want these things out. They talk about being taken someplace where sometimes for the women, ovum is taken. Dr. Lear mentions this. Sperm is taken from the males. What is going on with that, in your opinion?
I think, again, in that, similar to, I mean, the whole issue with Nephilim was a combination. Because in conception, a sperm and egg, there is an explosion in human life. Mark of the Beast, from the biblical word, has the idea of branding, that there is an identification side to it, an ownership side to it. But it's more than just that, because it alters, it affects their will. They cannot turn back. It affects everything about them. So if it is something that's even injected or something that is connected, and there would be something spiritually there too. So this is an alteration of humanity, and and once that's done, there just simply is no, like a Nephilim themselves. They could not morph out of it.
When the barcodes came out, they thought it was 666. I don't necessarily believe it's a microchip either, although it could be involved. I think that it is actually a genetic marker that is part of the Nephilim that permanently changes and rewrites people's DNA.
Say that again. Permanently does what?
It permanently rewrites somebody's DNA.
So
that they are no longer redeemable at that point. Because if you read the ancient text, so the book of Revelations, very prophetic text talking about the last days, it says that people beg for death and death flees from them. They've purchased a counterfeit immortality.
We left the military facility and are now back in Los Angeles, where we met with Doug Hamp and Dr. Chuck Missler, both experts on the Nephilim.
And just one thing really quick is when we talk about DNA and seed, we're really talking more about a code than we are simply about a physical medium. When, if I have a CD-ROM, the piece of plastic may cost a few pennies, but the information that's written on there could be priceless.
Sure.
And so that's what we're really talking about. When a seed is, we're talking about really information or data. And now there's an incredible process called recombinant DNA.
Right.
Recombinant DNA is a process by which they can open up a DNA strand, insert a foreign gene into that, and then it becomes a new chimeric or hybrid DNA strand.
And this is happening.
This is happening
right now.
And,
real time.
I was giving a talk on this, and afterward, someone came up to me. She says, I teach high school biology, and we're actually doing that in our AP classes. I was floored. I'm like, seriously? You're doing this in high school?
When we see things like whether it's UFOs or some of these other paranormal or supernatural phenomenon, we shouldn't be surprised, because that's at the boundary area of our understanding of our physical universe. And so now that as these things are increasing, that to me would be a symptom that we're moving into a climax of something. What's interesting is if you connect the dots here, it seems as if these abductions seem to be preoccupied with the human reproductive process. It's almost as if they're gathering data to try to understand what's going on. One of the conjectures that comes out of this is that they're not getting what they used to get. You see, in other words, back apparently in Genesis 6, they got these giants. They were super, the hybrids were of a super quality. And what they apparently, one would infer, are getting today are these diminutive, strange byproducts. And so the problem is, maybe, the degeneration of the human genome over the last several thousand years. Right. And what they're trying to study. Because, see, this is the only way they have to multiply their forces. Angels don't reproduce, but the hybrids do.
There is a rare museum in Crosbyton, Texas, where we met with curator Joe Taylor and Professor Judd Burton, who came along with us to see the replica of a giant human femur bone that was recast to actual size. stories of unearthed giants in the area persist, along with other large beasts unearthed in remarkable condition. And my research has shown that giant skeletons were pulled out of the mounds, let's say in Newark, Ohio, and in Tennessee, and different places as settlers moved from the East Coast and pushed west. Right. It seems like the skeletons, the bones are taken most often, not all the time, by the Smithsonian, and they are never seen again. Why is that?
I've heard that many times from many people, and I'm pretty sure that's true. That's been written about. So they have control of all these bones that most people know nothing about. So whatever they say about it seems to be true because, after all, they have PhDs. And they control what's said. So they don't want people digging these things up and putting them on display because that'd run contrary to the evolution doctrine.
Without putting words in your mouth, would you consider that intellectual fascism?
Sure. It's just lying.
Yeah.
It's telling half the truth.
There's an ancient manuscript from Josephus. Josephus, I'm sure you know, the Jewish historian from the 1st century. And in that, he writes that the bones of the Nephilim were openly on display in Jerusalem at the time of his writing. Right. And to show the inhabitants of Jerusalem what their ancestors, a couple thousand years before, or whatever, cleared the land from. Your thoughts on that? Right. How big do you think those bones were?
Well, I don't see there's any reason to doubt that they were 12, 15 feet tall. And if you look at when the 10 spies or the 10 spies were sent in with Joshua, they're not talking about somebody 12 feet tall there. That's not, well, we can't take those guys. Well, they've been taking guys like that. But if the man's 30 to 40 feet tall, now you'll look like a grasshopper to him, and you'll feel like a grasshopper to him. Yeah.
Right. Judd, what are your thoughts on the femur bone that's here at the museum, Mount Blanco Museum, that Joe Taylor was telling us about? What are your thoughts on that?
That is an interesting specimen in terms of the size, because you're looking at somebody that's in the range of 13, maybe 15 feet tall. And knowing Joe, knowing that he's a good field man, and he's done these casts, he's a veteran. I think that this is some of the best evidence, physical evidence that we have, short of an articulated skeleton, of the existence of giants in the ancient world.
Fascinating. Do you think that there were giants or Nephilim in the Americas? We've talked about, we've sort of hinted around that a little bit, but what are your, tell us right up front, do you think there were Nephilim in the Americas?
Yes, there were tribes of giants in the Americas. We have evidence, or at one time I should say, we had physical evidence of this, especially in the Mississippi and the Ohio River Valley. The Bureau of Ethnology archaeologists that were sent out in the late 1800s, early 1900s, collected a number of specimens. I mean, there are actual reports filed by the Bureau of Ethnology. Cyrus Thomas is one of these guys, one of these field archaeologists. And we can't discount oral tradition and mythology as sources as well. The Paiute legends of the Siteka giants, the red-headed, six-fingered, six-toed giants on each hand and foot. So yes, there's very good evidence.
Recently I was in the mountains in Ohio. Large megalithic constructions. And when you're down on the ground, it dwarfs a human being. These things, as Russ Dizdar talked about, you can fit the entire Great Pyramid into the Octagon Mound. That's how big this thing is. It's a ritualistic site. Who built those mounds, in your opinion?
The mounds that we find in the Ohio River Valley and the Upper Mississippi are quite interesting because they all seem to come from the same sort of cultural complex. And there are some interesting ones, such as the one outside of St. Louis, Cahokia, Monk's Mound, which is actually the largest earthen pyramid in North America.
Oh, I didn't know
It dwarfs all the ones that the Olmec actually built.
Wow. We know from reliable historic accounts that giant bones were extracted from burial mounds all over the United States. You cited examples in the latter part of the 19th, or the 19th century. This was going on. And this begs the question, where did these bones go and why can't we see them? I mean, how come hundreds and hundreds of skeletons were found, 8, 9, 12 footers, and yet there were no remains being displayed in museums? Why is that, in your opinion?
There does seem to be at least an attempt to hide some of the evidence extracted from mounds in the Ohio River Valley, places in the American Southwest. Some of those specimens that were brought back by the Bureau of Ethnology, we don't know what happened to them.
Last time we interviewed Deborah Sontag, who showed us in her research that she was finding other objects near the sun, and that NASA seemed to not be making it easy for us to research what their SOHO satellites are up to. We also heard about solar flares and unusual activity on the sun, which have caused some concerns that we may be in for a big coronal mass ejection in the near future. However, some Japanese scientists have an alternative view, saying that we are about to move into a period of reduced activity in the sun, resulting in lower temperatures on the Earth. Earlier, Comet Lovejoy gave us a spectacular display, leaving a trail millions of miles long, yet evading total destruction. The sun continues doing strange things that defy human experience, as this solar prominence created a spherical void in space that some thought was a nearby planet. Reports have emerged that every 11 years, the sun's magnetic poles go haywire, and for a time it may form two North Poles. Those magnetic effects, according to NASA, are felt throughout the entire solar system. In March 2012, the sun developed an awe-inspiring 600,000-mile triangular coronal hole. A magnetic disturbance, some scientists believe this hole allowed some of the sun's contents to spill out into space. But what is intriguing is that this triangle seems to have meaning in a more supernatural way. A large mural in France, known as a Tetragrammaton at Fifth Chapel of the Palace of Versailles, displays a triangle in the sun with the 4 Hebrew letters that spell out the most sacred name of God, Yahweh. This might seem weirdly prophetic in the actual events the sun displayed in March. A mystery developed in that out of all the frames of this phenomenon, the best frame, where the triangle is centered on the SOHO lens and Earth, was on March 13th at 1:13 in the afternoon. On NASA's 24-hour clock, that meant 1,300 hours, 13 minutes on the 3rd month of the year, the 13th day, or 3-13-13-13. Is this just a coincidence, or does it have more significance?
And 13 in Judaism is a very important number. 13 in Judaism is a numerical value of the word echad, unity.
Since our last report, there have been continued sounds all over the globe, some quite loud and unexplainable. But our investigation concluded that some of the sounds reported are fakes, using previous noises and editing new video over them. This doesn't explain all of them, however, and the mystery deepens. A 7.4 earthquake rocked southern Mexico, damaging 60 homes. Even though the quake was very strong, no deaths were reported. Earthquakes continue shaking all over the globe, with regular quakes near Japan and the Pacific Rim known as the Ring of Fire.
Millions of people across a large swathe of northern Italy will have been jolted awake in the most terrifying way and would have scrambled out into the comparative safety of the streets.
Could the magnetic pole disturbances both on Earth and the sun be affecting wildlife? Along the Rio de Janeiro coastline in Brazil, dozens of dolphins suddenly beached themselves, and swimmers rushed in and saved them. Within the past few years, the study of the universe has involved string theory, M theory, along with quantum theory. Digging deeper into what makes the fabric of the universe, some scientists have discovered error correction software embedded in those same equations. The type of error correction software has been known to us since the 40s, but the idea that it could be found within the fabric of the universe causes us to wonder what is really going on.
I think most of this takes a different complexion when you really understand what we know about our physical reality. We know today that it's a digital simulation from the boundaries of a finite universe on the large side to the quantum physics side, where everything is made of indivisible units, meaning it's all digital. We're in an electrical simulation. We know that on the large size, the universe is not infinite, it's finite. Big discovery of 20th century science. At the other end, there's a limit to smallness. We discover that everything is made of indivisible units, length, mass, energy, and time, are made up of indivisible units. It's digital. It's a digital. So we find ourselves, our reality is within a bounded simulation. And once so what makes that interesting as you stand back from all of that, that's exactly what the Bible has been saying from the first verse to the last. When you start seeing things, whether it's UFOs or the occult, you begin to realize this is in the fringes of what we understand, our limit of what we consider the physical universe, a subset of something larger.
A team of physicists from Cornell University presented a paper on this very topic, while other scientists now believe that we may indeed be living in a digital simulation, or an idea weirdly reminiscent of the movie The Matrix. There are a lot of opinions about what is really going on in Israel. We wanted this straight story, so in an exclusive interview for Watchers, we interviewed Jonathan Daniels, senior advisor for MK Danny Danon, the speaker of the Knesset in Israel. The Knesset is Israel's parliamentary group. What is the current situation in the Middle East? What are we looking at? What's happening over there?
It's a mess. The Middle East is in turmoil at the moment. Times are changing. Regimes are changing. The Middle East is in turmoil.
How is the Arab Spring affecting Israel? No one a year ago would have ever imagined millions of people all across the Arab world somehow rising up almost in unison and revolting against their country.
I mean, obviously it's affected for the negative in terms of a country like Egypt.
Sure.
Egypt, a country that we had strong relations with. I believe today we celebrate 33 years of the peace treaty with Egypt. And to see what's happened over the last year in terms of that peaceful agreement that we had, and in terms of the Sinai border and the whole peninsula that was turned into a peaceful region. A region that if you cross the border by mistake, nothing's going to happen. A peaceful border by all means. A border that the only reason we wanted to build a fence was to stop smugglers from smuggling in and out. Now, there's a considerable worry and concern amongst that whole border. A concern that terrorists can infiltrate through there, and they've tried to, and they have. So in terms of Egypt, the Arab Spring has been harmful and problematic to us.
What is happening with Hamas? Are rockets still being exploded across the Gaza Strip into Israel? Is this type of terrorism subsided, or are they planning more attacks? Tell us what's going on with Hamas in Gaza.
Well, you see, the situation in Gaza now is an interesting situation. Over the last few weeks, we saw masses of attacks on Israeli citizens and civilians all over the southern part of Israel, and really encroaching even on central Israel. Attacks in incredibly heavily, densely civilian population areas. And we find it that it's not Hamas anymore. They're waiting to see what happens.
The pundits on the news channels in the United States talked about that somehow this Arab Spring would lead to democracy. However, what we see now in Egypt is the rise of the Muslim Brotherhood, radical Islam, Sharia law. How does this affect Israel?
Well, I mean, from the beginning, the Israelis understood what was happening. It was very clear for us. First of all, in terms of intelligence and knowing that there was going to be an Arab Spring and an uprising in Egypt, we didn't have knowledge of that. In the Defense Committee, a day before in the Knesset, we were given a debriefing by one of the army generals on the current status of surrounding countries, and nothing was mentioned of a potential uprising in Egypt. No one knew about it. It caught the Israelis off guard, it caught the Americans off guard. No one had a clue it was coming. It came through Facebook. It came through Twitter. It just hit and came. And it came with promise on paper.
Was there any intimation, was there any evidence that this could erupt in a place like Egypt?
I have to confess that I and all of my colleagues in the press corps here and all the protesters I spoke with, nobody predicted that it would get so big, so fast, and throughout the country. It's taken everybody by shock. The police as well, they didn't expect this.
These are people who are going to clearly take a step forward and push democracy. In Israel, we understood that that's not the case. The fact that they have this religious law that comes by and takes over everything else, that swallows up everything else. This isn't America, this isn't the United Kingdom, this isn't Europe. There's no separation between church and state. Church is all. Church is everything. And it encompasses every single part of daily life. Now, you can have this small minority, and there's definitely a minority of people in Egypt, for example, who are learned, educated people, people who went to universities, people who I would love to sit down and have a cup of coffee with and talk about the Middle East and talk about their wishes for democracy. And it would be great to understand that. Unfortunately, it's not going to happen right now, and it can't happen because the only and Israel said this from the beginning, when President Obama and Secretary of State Clinton started middling and saying this about Egypt and detracting and then saying that and kept interfering too much, Israel knew straight away. And I remember, first of all, the day after in the Israeli news, one of the Israeli journalists sat down and said, the only group inside of Egypt that is organized and that can come together is the Muslim Brotherhood.
That's right.
And you're going to have too many factions fighting against each other, and it's just going to fall to pieces. The Muslim Brotherhood will take control. Look, it's not going to become a Sharia state within a second. It's not, you know, there's still a level of hope for mutual understanding and agreements between two countries. But we're seeing it's from Israel's perspective, it's becoming more and more problematic. We had our embassy trampled on. We had, you know, people having to be taken out through grace of others. I mean, this isn't a situation that Israel likes to be in.
Iran poses a real existential threat to Israel, with Benjamin Netanyahu's cabinet recently voting 8-6 in favor of a preemptive strike on Iran. Do you think this strike may happen anytime soon?
The Prime Minister's taken a very clear stance in Iran, a stance that the Israeli population are happy with. And the vast majority of Israelis understand that an attack on Iran is an unfortunate eventuality. Something that we don't want to happen, and we hope we don't have to do alone. And in terms of the Prime Minister's speech, there are very few statesmen in the entire world that can stand and speak like Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Because there are many who rush to condemn Israel for defending itself against Iran's terror proxies. Not you. Not America.
He is a true Israeli hero, and he's somebody that we look up to in Israel, and we're very lucky that we have him as a Prime Minister. You see, there's a lot of factors that need to be taken into account. One of the factors is the US presidential elections. Unfortunately, you see, President Obama, the last thing that he wants is Israel to attack with too much time before the elections. If we were to attack, say, in June, July, it would be way too soon. It'd be, it's too far away from the elections to be useful for him. You see, as soon as we attack, the United States will come in and will have to help out. And they will help out. And President Obama will be a hero. He'll be the person that came in and helped save the state of Israel. The same way that he was a hero after he killed Osama bin Laden. There's a 2-week time frame on an event like that. People remember that kind of thing for 2 weeks. After that, they forget about it. So it either has to happen within those 2 weeks. 2 weeks before the elections would be perfect.
October surprise.
Yeah, that would be perfect. And another problem for the president is that after an attack on Iran, oil prices are going to rise.
That's right.
There'll be turmoil for a few months. There's nothing that can. That's an unfortunate effect that's going to come from the attack. And Americans, unlike a lot of other people, vote from their pockets. If it affects me and affects my daily schedule and what I have to pay to get the kids from A to B, then you've got to go. And that more than anything can harm the president, and the president understands that. That's why the president is going to try and push us as much as he can not to attack, and push it off as close as he can to his elections, If we do it 2 weeks before, fantastic. If not, then afterwards he can try and convince us not to either. That's if we wait and we give the president what he's asking for. Now, we obviously have security and have intelligence inside who understand what they're doing and who understand that when the time's right, we'll attack, whether President Obama wants us to or doesn't want us to. We have to do what's right for the state of Israel. And as the Prime Minister rightly said as well, you know, for the last 2,500 years, Jews have been wandering around the world.
That's right.
And we've had nobody looking out for us. And we haven't been able to look out for ourselves either. When somebody came in to wipe us out, well, we could try and fight back, but we weren't strong enough. And right now, we can't wait to see if somebody else is going to stop in and stand in and say, hold on, don't do that. But God's with us, and they won't be able to smite us down.
What was the ephod? What was the ephod that was used thousands of years ago? Tell us about that.
Yeah, the ephod was really, it looked like an apron for the high priest.
An apron?
Right? Yeah, it was like an apron, right? And this was connected to a breastplate. Now this breastplate was folded, and inside, this, like a pocket inside, was a parchment with God's name. Because on this breastplate, which was joined to the ephod, there were 12 stones, and the names of the 12 tribes were engraved on it. And then, when a question was asked by the high priest, then the letters of the tribes, I mean those letters which have the answer, came out. So the high priest could find out through the letters which were shining, lightening, the answer to the question.
We know that the ephod was lost to us thousands of years ago. Is it possible that maybe someday we'll find the ephod?
Maybe, like other parts of the temples, we don't know something in the Vatican, we don't know, but you have to get them back. They are hidden somewhere, no doubt.
Do you think at the Torah codes there may be a type of a modern day ephod? What can you tell us?
Now this was amazing really thing that we found when we put the Hebrew word code Torah, which is the Israeli Torah code. Then we put the word ephod, it came there 3 times. It came exactly on the same line with the word code Torah, clearly showing connection between the Torah code and the ephod. And then what we have also there, dates, interesting. When it started coming to the world, I mean, the idea of the codes, they knew about it. It was really 1976. Then, interestingly, it came also this year, and Pinlight came there, unbelievable. Pinlight came there, minimally in the Old Torah, unbelievable. Clearly showing
that's amazing.
That Finland is supposed to be very much involved in it and bring to the world also, because amazingly it came every very small amount of letter in between Pinlight, so and it was a minimal. So I mean altogether, you know, this table shows that Torah codes are connected to the ephod, as it appears so many times with the same story, and also it appeared with the word Urim v'Tumim, with the lights and completeness. I mean, Urim v'Tumim, we said this was the parchment with the names of God, which was called Urim Tumim. So this also came in the tables there, which is exactly the idea of the Torah code, the ephod and the Torah code, which showing through letters, right, the answer, the meaning of things, you see.
The book of Esther is not part of the Torah. But you discovered something fascinating, extremely interesting in the book of Esther. Explain that to us.
This was found by Rabbi Weissmandel. Rabbi Weissmandel, in fact, he was the first one who brought...
And he would count on the 3x5 cards.
Now, what he did is amazing. This is really what you cannot understand without computer. A man could do it. He counted the number of letters of the scroll of Esther. The number of letters are 12,111. 1, 2, 1, 1, 1. This is he counted it without computer. He counted. Then he decided to look in the Torah for the Hebrew words, Megillat. Megillah is a scroll in Hebrew, and it came out in the Torah every 12,111 letters. It means you had the word Esther, letter after letter, and then you have the word Megillat, scroll, appearing every 12,111 letters in between. Amazing. So it means the number of letters of the scroll of Esther is a skip of its appearance in the Torah.
John Lindsay is a forensic archaeologist, an architect, and a Harvard graduate. He is one of a handful of experts on rock wall. His research included a major excavation on the wall. With his work threatened by government authorities, John had to postpone his investigation. But it remains as the most thorough probing of the wall we have today.
It's solid crystal. About 7 or 8 crystals, yeah. I've got them in here, and that's all it is. Forms of crystal. I've got a lot of interesting stuff to show you guys. Come on in. Sure. Come on in. Archaeology has been a novelty with me and a passion. And so anyway, after moving back to Rockwall, I was asked about it by a friend of mine, and asked if we could maybe dig or check into it. I said, I don't know much about it myself. Let's take a look. So we started in, and it got real interesting real quick, and just my passion and interest as a amateur archaeologist, I suppose, in geology, got to going. My undergraduate degree in biology and chemistry, so I knew the scientific method and how to go about doing a dig and all, and got confirmed later on everything was done in order. So that's how I got started. Someone asked me who built it. I have no other source than the Old Testament, Genesis in particular. Well, Moses wrote Genesis to Deuteronomy, and that's the only ones that I know that were on Earth at that time.
There are some people who look at the rock wall and say it's a natural like a volcanic intrusion. What's your answer to the skeptic?
It's both.
Okay.
And I believe I've got evidence of both. What we have is a mountain range, a flat plateau, and then the Trinity River Valley.
Wow.
And it's up on this plateau that the wall sits. And one of the first things we discovered when I got to looking at the wall and mapping the wall is every place I found the wall, or the tops of the wall, was at a 550 elevation. To have this natural formation with the top of this wall all at one height does not follow the conforms the geology of the rest of the land. You want to slip it out and over here on the floor?
Okay.
Yes, we can get him to the light of it. Quite heavy, isn't it?
Yep.
Oh. We know this is not done after the fact because of the patina and all. It reaches, everything that's here reaches down
I see
in these
that.
grooves. And of course we've had,
and by the patina you mean
microscope, yes.
Explain the patina.
The patina, that's aging process.
Right, okay.
Of the stone.
And we see all this is aged equally.
Yes.
If this was a new channel, the colors
would be a difference.
Right.
The colors, but we've looked at this on the microscope and all, and it's no doubt the geologists will all have looked and accepted. This piece right here could well be something broken off, or it could be part of a bigger picture. I don't know. Dr. Joseph Davidowitz and Margie Morris, that I've picked up and read and got in touch with and talked to later, who did a fascinating study on the pyramids at Giza and analyzing the stones, the interior stones. You know, the limestone is the outside casing
I'm familiar,
and all.
sure.
But in the interiors, in the King's Chamber and so forth,
that's all
the
granite,
composition
red granite, right.
of of the inner stones is same as the rock wall. That's where we tie together, not just on the same parallel on the earth as all ancient cities are, so is rock wall, but we have composition that's matching up with compositions in the Great Pyramid. I told you I started on this in '93, and it was '99 before we actually got to dig.
Wow.
Most of those years was me studying, started out with Egyptian hieroglyphs, the Mayans, learning to read Egyptian, the Mayan, and several ancient languages, not fluent in them, but at least recognize them.
Okay.
Well, through my research, I found out back in 1901 or 1906, just a tunnel, a stone corridor with a vaulted ceiling, much like the Mayans, goes back in here. There were some skeletons found and all. There's a lot of weird stories we don't have time to get into now. I can point you to those in these rooms, but it goes back into a big anomaly under the square, a big, huge cavern, which I wanted to get into, but not been able. The courthouse sits on top of it.
Whoa.
Underground cavern. Now, and it's shown up, and it's been known for a long time.
And has anyone excavated that site?
No, it's right downtown Rockwall under the courthouse. But it's been known. And here's where Zachariah Sitchin tells me, in his opinion, this was more of the mapping going back to Yucatan Peninsula all the way up through from South America up through Yucatan Peninsula here and up to Washington State, which is the path of Nibiru. It's returned from the south, or it comes up, from the south. And in his opinion, this was one of the mapping signs, locations of the path of the crossing, Nibiru.
Interesting.
Another thing interesting about Rockwall, all ancient cities around the world on the 30th parallel, give or take 7 degrees or so. None out of it. That's where it is, banned around the world, such as Giza Pyramid, Mesopotamia, Sippur, Ur, all of it. So is Rockwall. So one other interesting thing here, there's 2 other places that's on this 30th parallel. One is Edwards Air Force Base out in California, and the other one is Cape Kennedy, Cape Canaveral in Florida.
Fascinating.
On the 30th parallel. Well, it just so happens on the 30th parallel, the reason the shuttle lands at these 2 places, that's the only place you can come from outer space and land on Earth successfully without glancing out or crashing in, is on the 30th parallel because of the mechanics of the spin.
I understand. I get it. I get it.
All ancient cities, the rock wall is included. Bam, bam, bam. Bud Shelton, the geologist from New Orleans, helped me discover. I didn't, at the time, didn't recognize it. But he sure did, out on the site when I started my dig. He took a photograph of foundation in his house in New Orleans. See the trowel marks on his concrete of his foundation? That's it right there, trowel marks. That's man-made. It's his foundation of the house. Got it?
Okay.
Okay. Look at these. That's the rock wall. That's a piece of the rock wall. When he saw that, there's trowel marks.
Interesting. Fascinating.
This is that concrete coating, the sand that's on the wall. I'll talk about in a minute. I mean, come on, guys. Look at this. What do you think that is? Same color and everything. All this is tile set.
Okay.
Geopolymer. Looks just like it, doesn't it? Looks just like the rock wall, doesn't it? There's a real geopolymer. There's trowel marks, and there's his evidence that this was poured in place.
Interesting. Wow.
There's been no other stone found to match this stone.
Anywhere?
Anywhere by the geologists. They wanted to name it Lindsay after me because I found it, and analyzed it, but it don't matter. I'm not going to call it Lindsay. But the point being is that it's one of a kind, except in the Great Pyramids at Giza.
Wow. To the best of your knowledge, this isn't found anywhere else on this planet, this composition?
Except at the pyramids at Giza.
Is in the King's Chamber.
According to Davidowitz. This is the actual dig of this area up here, photographed, okay? See this sand coating?
Yes.
This mortar,
it's like
mortar coating on the outside?
Like a plaster.
It's about that thick, 2 inches thick.
Okay.
And it's everywhere over the wall, and it's been known about it. Back in the 1800s when they found it, and when they exposed that mortar to the air, it hardens up to over 3,000 psi.
Whoa.
This is the mortar. It's like as fine as a talc. Now, the composition of this is totally opposite. Nothing to do with the wall. This is soft as talc. It's about 0 or 1. Where the rock wall is 8 on the Moore scale. So the two don't relate to it. It's right on the outside of it.
Right.
Okay. But do you know what? It's waterproof.
Wow.
Why is it waterproof?
I don't know.
You put it on the microscope and it's 50-50 percentage of little tetrahedrals and little round balls. We're talking microscopic. And they all interfit together and water molecules can't get through it. And that's why it hardens up. It's a 50-50 mix of structurally tetrahedrals and round balls. Took a hammer.
Wow.
You see how, you can see the crystals
beautiful.
in it.
Yeah, look at that.
Okay, and I busted off a corner of it. Well, lo and behold, that's why I got this tape over it. It's the sand.
The same as this.
It's the mortar that's inside the stone. Why is it there? Well, one thing it does tell us, maybe this stuff was poured, man-made, and somehow that got in there. Nature wouldn't do that. It's totally foreign. I mean, the two don't belong together. It's a waterproofing.
Interesting.
And it's a structural element.
After seeing John's evidence, we flew to Dallas and planned to drive to Rock Wall. 45 minutes after we landed and got our bags, a tornado ripped through the area, flipping semi-trucks in the air and sending them blocks away. One of the areas that got a direct hit was coincidentally Rock Wall, where we had planned to go that afternoon. We postponed our trip until the following day. There was no exposed area of the wall we could see, and no staffers at the museum knew where we could go, saying that the wall mostly lay under private property. We're here in Rockwall, Texas. It's a beautiful, quiet little town. And to our amazement and bewilderment, when we went to City Hall to ask where the ruins of Rockwall were, we were told that there are none. The wall, apparently, any excavations that were done, for the most part, have been covered up, even on private property. I'm standing in front of one of the oldest houses, if not the oldest house, in Rockwall, and we asked the curator of the museum what she knew about Rockwall. Everyone we've talked to so far knows very little about it. What we find amazing is, just like in the Ohio Valley, the people here at Rockwall are literally living over what may be a sacred site, and yet all memory of it, or at least most of the memory, has just been sort of quieted down, put back to sleep, and no one knows what's lying right under their feet. What happens after you die? We traveled 50 miles outside of New Orleans to see Dr. Jeffrey Long to ask what his research has revealed. Dr. Long has cataloged over 3,000 near-death cases. His interest in this area is both scientific and supernatural. To Dr. Long, there is no doubt that the experience is real.
Pleasure to meet you.
Absolutely. Wonderful. What piqued your interest in near-death experiences?
You know, it was a long time ago when I was in my residency training in radiation oncology, which is the medical use of radiation to treat cancer. I was busily going through one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world, the Journal of the American Medical Association, looking for a cancer-related article. And to my complete surprise, I found an article with the word near-death experience in it. And I stopped. I was shocked because I had never heard of that before. And I remember thinking, you're either dead or you're not dead. What's this all about? And so, intrigued, I stopped and read the article and was immediately fascinated. I remember thinking, how is it possible that people clinically dead all around the world are having this same lucid, highly organized experience? And I remember thinking prophetically, wow, why isn't there more research on this fascinating topic?
Can you briefly describe what an NDE, near-death experience, is?
Well, no two near-death experiences are the same, but if you look at many of them, and I have thousands, you see a very consistent pattern of elements. No doubt in America today, millions of people have had a near-death experience. Around the world, tens of millions of people have had near-death experiences. While you can't really generalize to a near-death experience, a typical detailed near-death experience would involve, of course, a life-threatening event. No matter where on earth you are or what your religious belief is, near-death experiences and its content are strikingly similar. They're unconscious and they may be clinically dead with no heartbeat, no spontaneous respiration. And yet at that time, when a lucid, conscious memory should be absolutely impossible, they do have that experience. And that's the experience part of a near-death experience. Very often their consciousness goes above their body and they see ongoing earthly events, often their own frantic resuscitation efforts. Following that, they may go through a tunnel, variably described. Often there's a beautiful, mystical light at the end of the tunnel. After they pass through the tunnel, they're often in an unearthly realm. It's been referred to as heavenly realms. That's probably not an overstatement. Beautiful colors beyond description on earth, landscapes, there may be other beings, other people there. While they're there, they may have a life review where they see a part or even all of their prior life. They may encounter people that they knew during their earthly life that died, typically relatives, but it can be friends and acquaintances. Very often in a near-death experience, they then reach what's called a boundary, and that's, if you will, a stopping point.
Fascinating.
It can be a creek or a fence or something along the path they're going on. But once they reach that point, and there's often other beings with them, they have to make a decision about whether they're going to return to their earthly body. Remarkably, the great majority of near-death experiencers at that time, even though they've lived their earthly life for decades, that's their friends, family, loved ones, everything they know, the experience is so beautiful, the emotions are so intensely positive, they so feel that they're home in this realm that they do not want to return to their earthly life.
That's just amazing. In your book, one of the most astounding testimonies was regarding a person born blind.
Right.
So they've never seen anything that we're seeing in this room. They've never seen what light is, color, what human beings even look like. They had an NDE. Can you tell us what happened?
I'm glad you brought that up. My interview with Vicky, who was born totally blind, is one of the most astounding near-death experiences ever recorded. To somebody born totally blind, vision is unknown and unknowable. You cannot explain vision to someone totally blind from birth in terms of the other four senses. I tried, it's impossible. And yet Vicky, when she was in her early 20s, had a severe auto accident. And for the first time that she had vision in her life was when she was in the emergency room looking down on what she recognized as a body below her. She didn't even know it was herself.
She looked like her. She'd never seen herself.
She'd never seen herself.
Howard Storm's near-death experience is one of the most remarkable we've ever heard. He came out to meet us in California, but first he asked to see the Pacific Ocean, which we were happy to do. The hills are fun to drive and the beaches in Malibu are known the world over for their incredible beauty.
One of the most remarkable examples of a frightening near-death experience is by Howard Storm. He truly has an excellent example of a frightening experience and how that experience can turn around a life and result in a much more positive, loving individual afterwards.
Tell us about what happened right before you were taken out of your body. In other words, give us an idea of the sickness, let's say, that triggered it.
I was 38 years old, college professor on an art tour. I was leading an art tour of students around Europe, and I had a perforation of the small stomach, taken to a hospital, but it was a Saturday. Socialized medicine in Paris. We were confident that I was going to get great medical care. Instead, after being taken to the emergency room and told that my situation was grave and that I had to have surgery immediately, I was taken to another hospital and parked there for 10 hours and never seen by a doctor, never given any medication, nothing whatsoever. Nobody took my blood pressure, temperature, anything, just nothing. Just parked in a room and left. The doctors in the United States told me my situation was like having a burst appendix. Not a appendicitis, it was like having a burst appendix, and that my life expectancy was about 5 hours. So in 10 hours, I was in very bad shape.
And this is because the acid in the stomach has leached into...
Yeah, and so, to put it crudely, I was not only infecting myself, I was dissolving myself. As I agitated my diaphragm, trying to inhale, exhale, it intensified the pain. So breathing was very, very painful. And so I was trying to breathe with as little movement as possible. And so to me, letting go was to stop trying to do that and just not breathe anymore. And I knew that it was going to be very easy for me to die because I had been trying not to die for hours. And if anyone's ever been there, you know when you're dying. I mean, it's not like a mystery. It's not like, oh, what a surprise. You know, this was been going on for a very long time. So I closed my eyes and went unconscious. And
what happened at the moment where you thought you were dead?
I just went out, just gone. And then I awoke from that, and I was completely, utterly surprised because I was sitting next to the bed, and not only was the pain gone, which had been my total reality, but I felt more alive than I've ever felt before. And what that means is my touch, my taste, my smell, most particularly in my instance, my sight. Instead of seeing a 160-degree field of vision, I was now seeing a 360-degree field of vision, which I thought was like, oh, this is pretty cool. Rather than having like a certain depth of field, I saw like total focused clarity, far and near simultaneously.
In my research, I've extensively reviewed all the skeptical arguments about the reality of near-death experience. In fact, there's over 20 skeptical explanations of near-death experience, and they cover the gamut of physiological, psychological, cultural-based explanations for that remarkable experience. And I will tell you the reason that there's so many skeptical explanations is that there's no one or several explanations that make sense even to the skeptics.
So I'm starting to yell at my wife, who's on the other side of the bed, still crying, and she has no reaction to me yelling at her. And I'm saying very crude things to get her attention, and very angry. So I decide that she is messing with me, because it was very typical of her that when she wanted to reject me, to just ignore me. So I turned to my roommate, who was a very kind 68-year-old Frenchman, who had been very nice to us the whole day. And I'm yelling and screaming at him, the same non-reaction from him. I'm screaming in his face, and his eyes are open, staring right through me as if I don't exist, which of course to him I didn't exist. But, so I'm getting very agitated, very upset. The room is bright and lit, and I hear people outside the room calling me by name, and they're saying in perfect English, this is a French hospital, and so I thought this was very weird. They're saying, Howard, come on, hurry, let's go. So I go over to the doorway of the room, and there's people outside the room, out in the shadowy, darkened hallway. And I said, I'm sick, I'm supposed to have surgery, we're waiting for a doctor. And they said, we know all about you, we've been waiting for you for a long time, hurry up, it's time for you to go. And I said, are you from the surgeon? You know, I need surgery, you know. And they said, come on, let's go, no more time to talk about it, it's time to go. And so I'm like, I'm assuming, okay, we're off to surgery. They've come to take me.
So you're not. Let me say something. Let me interject something.
Yeah.
You're not sure. I mean, you're out of your body, but you're not. You haven't been able to really put that together yet. You still think for some reason you're stuck here.
Absolutely.
But
At
you're
all.
really not there.
Absolutely.
You're in another dimension.
My consciousness, my understanding, and I think that this is, we all take our understanding of who and what we are beyond this world. The people shepherd me down the hallway, and we're going along, and I'm becoming aware that there's something really wrong with all this. Is just not right. Well, first of all, there's no more architectural features. Now I'm aware that we're on the 4th floor of Cochin Hospital, but we never hit stairs. We never go up or down. We're just walking. No walls, no ceiling, just space. And
What did it look like when you say space? Was it like light that slowly faded into darkness, or what did that look like? That transition, can you recall?
Shadowy, out of focus, very fuzzy, very indistinct, which was just the opposite of what I've been experiencing in the room, which was incredible detail and intensity of everything. And now everything is hazy and difficult to perceive. Very, very hard to even perceive the people who, as the atmosphere around us becomes darker and heavier, they become closer and closer and closer. So eventually we're bumping into each other, and they're moving me on, pushing me on. Eventually it's so dark.
When you say they, how many were they, and what did they look like? How were they?
Originally maybe 8 or 10, but in a while I'm aware that there's many, maybe dozens or hundreds. I mean, of course there's no way for me to count, just a lot now. And I'm terrified, because I don't know where we're going. This has gone on for a long time, and they're starting to say ugly things, and I'm getting pretty sure that this is no longer the hospital. I mean, we've gone way too far to be. We've walked out of Paris by now. We're gone. I mean, we're far away. I'm sure that they don't mean me well, and I know that there's no doctor or operation in my future, and I said, I'm not going any further, I'm done. I'm going back, which was a bluff, because I had no idea which way, back would be, and I didn't know where I was. It's darkness. And they said, you're almost there, and they started to push and pull at me. Well, I had played some football in high school, and I'd been a tough guy, and I'd been in some fights and stuff, and so I started to defend myself. They're pushing, so I'm like punching and, and trying to fend for myself, but there's a lot of them. Because of their own emptiness and their own torment, the only way that they could relate would be to want to bring someone else to their same place. Like if you're with a group of alcoholics or drug users, they want you to be high. I mean, nobody wants a sober person when everybody's getting drunk. Sure. If you're in a football crowd, you can't just sit there and not cheer. Just looking at it like, what's the matter with you? Aren't you enjoying the game? And they wanted me to be one of them. And the horrible part of this is that I was one of them. I know that in many respects, they were my kindred brothers and sisters. Wow. And I was not a stranger to them or they to me. And all they were doing was initiating me into their world of loneliness, hopelessness, and despair, ultimately meaning their lack of God, their lack of love. The Bible says love is God, God is love, and these are people who had rejected all of that, and when they left this world, they were living what they had basically sought all of their lives, except that in this world there weren't the pleasures of this world, like skies and trees and birds and joy and fun and stuff like that. So anyways, eventually they had enough of me that I was not able to respond anymore, which meant that I was laying on the ground in a fetal position. I had been scratched, bitten, torn, and the part that I don't talk about was they had done things done things to me that are too unpleasant for me to speak about and too obscene for me to want to relate. But I would suggest that there's no horror movie, no S&M movie or book or imagination that can begin to conceive of the things that they do without any hesitation.
How long did this particular part of the experience go on for?
Forever and ever and ever. I mean, and what I mean by that is time without any way of measuring it. I don't pray. I don't know how to pray. I can't pray. Forget it. And the voice said, pray to God. And I thought.
So 3 times?
Yeah. And I thought, well, when I was a kid, we prayed. I knew how to pray. So I'm trying to remember what it is to pray. And all I could remember was snatches of things that I had memorized when I was in school. So I've got, 407 years ago, our forefathers brought forth in this continent a new nation, casino, no, not prayer. The quality of mercy is not strained, it droppeth as the gentle rain upon the place beneath it is tread. No, it's not a prayer. Glory, glory, hallelujah, his truth goes marching on. No, that's a song. But anytime I remembered something that had any reference to God in it, the people around me, in very, very powerful, obscene language, which I won't try to replicate, said, there is no God, nobody can hear you, and if you don't stop it, we're going to make it much worse for you. This was how I understood God. This is how I was taught God was this really, really nice guy, Jesus, loved me and cared about me, and when I was a little boy, I prayed to him, and, help me, I'm scared, stuff like that came to me. And I really felt like it was my only shot. I mean, this is either going to work or it's going to be what I think it's going to be, which is this darkness and torment forever. So I called out, Jesus, please help me. And with that, light came into the darkness, came upon me. Hands and arms came from this being of light, reached down and touched me. And when he touched me, all of my gore, which was much more profound than I had known, it was very gross, kind of just slowly dissolved away, and I became whole and intact. That was very secondary to what his touch did, which was internally it filled me with his love, which is no possible way to describe that, because it's far more intense than any human experience of love. I mean, if I took my mother's love and multiplied it by 100 or 1,000 times, that might be somewhat like what his love was. And his hands went under me while I'm feeling this healing and love, and he lifted me up without any effort and embraced me, and he held me, and I just wanted to be held by him, because this may sound strange, but I also knew that he liked me very much. He didn't just, this love wasn't like this abstract, sentimental thing. It was like, he knew me, and he liked me, and he cared about me, even though I had been very, very mean to him for my entire adult life. And I was aware that I had utterly and completely rejected him, and that he was going, that's okay, it's okay. Don't worry about it. It's like, you're all right. I'm here now.
Have there been any negative experiences? People going through NDEs, not having a very positive experience, something traumatic happening in a very negative sense?
About 5% of near-death experiences are truly frightening and can involve some very frightening, even hellish graphic imagery. And yet, if you follow those people for years after the experience, they may say it was the most valuable experience they ever had to learn about themselves, to grow and change and be better people.
There was a moment in time when you had to go back. How was that presented to you, and how did you find yourself coming back? How did that all take place?
When I asked all the questions that I could think of to ask, even making up questions just to perpetuate the fun of being with Jesus and these people, because it was like wonderful. I mean, getting all this attention, I'm getting all this information, and I've retained all that that whole thing, and I just wanted that to go on forever. But when I just couldn't think of anything more to ask, I asked the one question that had been troubling me for a long time, which was, I said as a statement, "I'm ready to go to heaven." Jesus said, "No, you've got to go back to the world and try to do what you were created to do in the first place." So we had a huge argument, and I'm here to tell you that I argued as strongly with Jesus as I possibly could for me to go to heaven, and he persuaded patiently and kindly and with good reasons why that wasn't going to happen, and I was going to come back here. It was a really interesting conversation, because I have to fall back on this stuff all the time in my life. When I get discouraged, depressed, lose my way, I go back to the things that he said and try and restore myself, to explain to myself and re-energize myself of why I'm here. And ultimately he persuaded me that I was going to go back, and that's all there was to it. And so I agreed to that. And when I agreed to that, there was no transition. I was just very rudely back in the bed, in the pain, and immediately the nurse who had been in the room a little earlier saying there was no doctor came and said, "A doctor has arrived." This is at 9 o'clock at night in Paris. "A doctor has arrived and we're going to have a surgery." And they threw my wife out of the room, prepped me, and took me to surgery, and I had the surgery on 10 o'clock that night.
Some people that when they come back, it seems like knowledge has been just downloaded into them. How can that be?
Great question. You know, we have many near-death experiences that describe what's called universal knowledge. When they're in these unearthly realms, they may become aware of knowledge far beyond what we have on Earth. They may be aware of, if we call truly universal knowledge, how everything fits together, details, things beyond our wildest scientific, mathematical awareness or understanding that we have here on Earth. Unfortunately, when they return to their earthly body, almost never do they retain any portion of that universal knowledge. And in fact, one near-death experiencer said, "Of course I can't remember that universal knowledge. It's like putting an entire ocean of knowledge into the thimble that's my brain."
Right.
My book came out over 2 years ago, and there's been a lot of time for the world, for skeptics, to come up with their best arguments as to why my conclusions, that being that there's an afterlife, a wonderful afterlife for all of us, isn't real. And that skeptic rebuttal has not come about. It isn't there. I mean, as best I can tell from having lived and breathed and shared that book now for over 2 years, the conclusions stand. We really do have an afterlife, all of us, a wonderful afterlife.
NDEs, near-death experience. When we sat down with Dr. Jeffrey Long and Howard Storm, we discovered, in fact, that there's something more to this reality, which may be just a digital simulation of something far greater. When a person passes over, when they die and they move into this other reality, everything is more vibrant, more alive. All over the world, people are uneasy. They're unsettled. There is an unrest. People are starting to wonder, is something about to happen? Are we, in fact, on the edge? In your opinion, is there any link between the Gulf oil spill and the Land for Peace deal?
The U.S. negotiating team had made some progress that indicated Israel essentially was going to give up building at that point in time for a period of time So the best date that we can figure that took place was April 20th, 2010, the day that the Gulf oil rig exploded.